Aw, freak out. You freak, says she. Freak out. Aw, freak out. You freak.
And then one day I was reading through agency blogs, and I came across this agent who had mentioned that they suspected that fairies would be one of the new trends in young adult. And all of a sudden, I felt like I'd been hit on the head with a bat, because I have always loved fairies. I mean, one of my earliest memories is of me as a little kid. My parents had these two books, and one of them had poems, and one of them had a story. And I can't remember anything about the poems or the story, but what I do remember is that they had beautiful paintings in them of fairies in flowers. I really haven't strayed very far. Wearing flower petals and living in the flowers. Gorgeous, gorgeous paintings. And I would page through this book, and I would get to the end and sigh and turn it over and start again. You know? But I had never, in all of my brainstorming, in fact, you can ask my husband how crazy my brainstorming things were. Sometimes I'd just be like, Kenny, what about robots in Cleveland? You know, and he'd be like, and then I'd come back a little later and I said, what about a love story on Mars? And he would just be like, never in all of my crazy, rambling brainstorming had I ever thought to write a book about fairies. And it was seriously like being struck in the head with lightning. I was like, oh, hello, duh. And so I instantly knew that I wanted to write a book about fairies, and I had started a book that was a YA. It was a ghost book, but I was like 50 pages into it, and I didn't have a plot, so I didn't know where that one was going. So that one wasn't an option yet either. I've actually finished that since, and actually sold it to Harper, but at that point it was just flopping around like a dead fish. It had no plot. And so I thought, you know what, I think that I will go ahead and try a young adult fairy book. And so then came the task of trying to decide how I was going to do fairies, because I didn't want to do the same fairies that everyone else did. I wanted my fairies to stand out and be different. And so at this point, I was about 7.5 months pregnant, and I was doing a lot of tossing and turning at night anyway. But one of these nights when I'm tossing and turning, I came up with this idea of this goth fairy who lived with these 3 old women and couldn't go out after midnight because there was no power from the sun. It was like this Goldilocks and the 3 Bears meets Cinderella meets Superman. It seemed really cool at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it really didn't hold up at 8 o'clock in the morning. But that little tiny seed of an idea that the fairies couldn't go out after midnight because there was no power from the sun led me to go, well, why would that be? And, I mean, in my book there's not a midnight cutoff time, but the fairies do get their power from the sun, all their energy from the sun. And I was like, why would that be? And the obvious answer was that they photosynthesized. And everything just clicked at that point. I was like, well, if the fairies... Has anybody here not read Wings? I don't want to spoil it too much.
We've already spoiled her on the way down here, so...
Okay. So the idea that the fairies could be plants immediately led to all sorts of other what-if questions. Well, what if... Okay, so if you have a fairy that's a plant, how are they going to survive in the human world? What will they eat? How will they behave? What are their sleeping habits going to be? What are their... reproductive habits going to be? Is their magic going to fit in there? And in the beginning, I wasn't sure there was going to be magic at all. I kind of thought maybe the idea of fairies being plants was enough, but I have a saying, books are only fun if they have kissing or magic, and preferably both. So,
agreed.
Both is good. But from there, this whole mythos just kind of spilled out of this girl who suddenly discovers that not only is she a fairy, but she's a plant, And it was just, everything just really kind of came together after that. And like I said, I was very pregnant, and I thought, you know what, I've had a new baby before, and I know how little sleep and how much work they are. And if I don't get this book finished by the time my baby is born, it is never going to get finished. My husband had just gotten off of school for the summer. He was in law school, and bless his heart, he said, you know what, you have an agent, you want to keep your agent, I feel like you're close to a breakthrough, I'm going to watch the kids, and you lock yourself in the office and write. Craziest 6 weeks of my life. I don't ever want to write a book that fast again, and trust me, I paid for it in edits. But, you know, we're talking 10-hour days, sometimes 7 days a week. Every moment that I could, I was working on this book that I was just so excited about. During this time, I had to plot out the entire series, though, because I love it when you read a series and you get done with the last book, and then you can go back and reread the first book and see all the little hints. Well, in order to write those hints in there, you have to know what's going to happen. I called up my agent one day, and I said, so, you know, things aren't going so well with this other book. Are you interested in seeing more from me? And she goes, oh, yes, absolutely I am. What are you thinking of working on? I said, well, it's done. And she goes, oh, okay, well, send it in. And so I sent it in and got ready to have a baby and waited and waited and waited until my baby was 9 days late. And I could have worked on my book for 9 more days. But, of course, if I'd have tried that, he would have come early. I should have done that. And so, you know, I got lost in the baby thing and didn't notice that, you know, 8-10 weeks had passed. It was about 2.5 months. And my agent gets back to me. And for those of you who don't know authors, our books are like our babies, and we have a really hard time letting them go. And so she calls me up, and she's very tentative, and she's like, so, I read your new book, and I do have to say that I think that it would be an easier sell than doing another round on your fantasy, and I wondered if maybe you would like to consider possibly changing focus. And I said, oh, yeah, let's do that. That would be awesome. And she's like, really? Okay, good. We're changing focus. Okay, grabbing that horse while it's running. And the two of us worked on it for about a month and a half and sent it out. And, of course, you know, she was excited about it, and I was excited about it, and my husband was excited about it, and my husband never got excited about the fantasy. And so I was like, my husband's excited about this one, so surely, you know. And within 24 hours, we had a response from an editor who was like, the idea of fairies as plants is never going to work in the adult market. And wow, that is a blow. After 24 hours, I'm like, could you give me like a weekend? And we proceeded to get 3 more rejections over the next couple of weeks. And then we had just about 10 days with nothing, no word whatsoever. And when you have a power agent, they tend to read your stuff faster. And so I knew that I would be expecting answers sooner. And I had 6 submissions still out. And I was just like, you know, nobody's responding. With our other submission we'd send out, half of the people never responded. So I was like, well, these people are just never going to respond. This is never going to happen. My husband was just starting his 2nd year of law school. And for those of you who don't know, law school is really expensive. And I am a childbirth educator by trade. And I had been teaching classes when we lived in Phoenix, and I had kind of justified not teaching them when we moved up to do law school, because law school schedules are really, you never know what's going to happen. You don't know what homework you're going to have till that night. Kenny might come home with, you know, 2 pages to read. He might come home with 80 pages to read. You just never have any idea. And so I was like, well, the schedule is so weird. I'll put it off. And I justified myself because I was writing a book, and that was how I was contributing. And so I had been cleaning stuff, and I had found my box of childbirth education stuff. And I pulled it out, and I just had this sinking feeling, and I was like, you know, I really need to just put this on the back burner for a while and actually contribute to the financial well-being of my household. I need to get this stuff organized. I need to start teaching classes. After Kenny's out of law school, I can pursue this again, but right now I'm just being a drain on my family's resources and time, and I need to give up this stupid dream and go back to actually being a productive member of society. And I kid you not, within an hour I got the call from my agent that Harper was interested in publishing the book, and it is amazing how many authors have a story like that. And so that's how I found out that Wings was going to become a book. Happy reading!